Okay, I think we're about ready to get started. Yeah? Fantastic. Well, good morning, and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Caroline Isaacs, and I'm the Executive Director of Just Communities Arizona. Some of you may know me and Rebecca from our work with the American Friends Service Committee. On January 22, we transitioned the work of that organization to become Just Communities Arizona, or JCA. The mission of this organization is to create new models for safety and justice outside the criminal punishment system. We work alongside people with convictions, formerly incarcerated communities, to center their stories, cultivate the next generation of community leaders, reframe justice through a lens of healing, not retribution, dismantle outdated ideas and harmful systems, and build community-based solutions. And today's event is a perfect illustration of this approach. Today, you will hear directly from the experts, people who are personally impacted by unjust sentencing laws, who will help us understand what these laws mean in the lives of real people, and who challenge us to find a better approach and more effective solutions. The ReFraming Justice Project was founded by Dr. Grace Gomez in 2019 to cultivate the leadership of people directly impacted by the punishment system in the movement to end mass incarceration. This is the 4th annual ReFraming Justice Day. While COVID has changed the venue from the halls of the state capitol to Zoom, the intention is still the same: to ensure that the people who make the laws in Arizona hear directly from those who are living with the impacts of those laws, and to engage in dialogue about how we can do better, protecting all of our communities and everyone in them. To begin today, we'd like to show a short video that presents the story of someone who is currently incarcerated in Arizona. As she cannot be here in person, we produced this video presenting her words, read by JCA staff. The video also presents some basic information on the felony murder statute, which is the focus of our event today. After the video, I will provide more information about today's conference and introduce our first panelist. So please enjoy this video.
This year, Reframing Justice centered the stories of people currently incarcerated in our legislative advocacy efforts. People inside sent us their stories and calls for change. These are their stories.
We value healing and restoration as the means to safer communities.
The problem is a law called felony murder. Felony murder applies when someone commits a certain kind of felony and someone dies in the course of it. It doesn't matter whether the death was intentional or accidental. The defendant is liable for it. The following story comes from Taiwania, who is incarcerated for felony murder.
My boyfriend robbed a store while I was present with him. The store clerk shot me 4 times and killed my boyfriend. I was sentenced to 25 to life under a statute called felony murder, which allows prosecutors to seek maximum punishment. I lost my job as a loan officer, my house, and the ability to be a daily presence in the life of my children.
Felony murder statutes are a clear example of unjust sentencing.
During my incarceration, I have taken responsibility for my past, but I cannot heal from the injustice of my sentence by myself. I need the support of my community to eradicate the unjust practice of severe sentencing for felony murder.
Repealing felony murder statutes is the first step towards creating the possibility of healing and restoration. Sentencing Taiwania to life in prison for the death of her boyfriend created more harm. It destroyed more lives. How does this sentence contribute to safer communities? This is not justice.
Please support legislation to repeal life sentences for felony murder.
As I mentioned previously, the focus of our event today is the issue of felony murder. Under this statute, a person can be charged and convicted of first-degree murder, even if they did not actually kill the victim or intend to create harm. They simply had to be in the act of committing a felony. Unlike a general murder charge, it is not necessary to prove that the defendant intended to kill or injure the victim or was even present in order for the defendant to be convicted of felony murder. An accidental killing or killing of a person by police officers during the commission of certain felonies can be enough for an individual to be convicted of felony murder. This charge carries a mandatory minimum sentence of life in prison, with a limited option for release after 25 years for some. And in some cases, a person can even be sentenced to death. No matter their rehabilitation or changes that may arise in the case, a person who is sentenced to life for felony murder cannot apply to the Board of Executive Clemency to be released on any basis until the completion of 25 years, and those are rarely granted. We at JCA are calling for a repeal of this harmful and unnecessary law. 9 states have already repealed or heavily amended their felony murder statutes, and Arizona is one of several states where there are active campaigns to end its use. And you will be hearing from advocates in Minnesota about their efforts later this morning. We know that the first step is education. And the very best way we know to help people understand how these kinds of sentences are hurting families and communities is to center the voices of those who are personally impacted by them. Too often, these debates become abstract, focused on numbers and statistics, and gloss over the pain and suffering of real people, our families, our neighbors. We hope that you will listen with empathy. After education must come action. There have been bills introduced the past 2 years to repeal felony murder, but sadly, they have never received a hearing. We believe that once our leaders really take a good look at this law and how disproportionate the sentence is to the actual behavior and the cost, both financial and human, they will agree with us that it must be repealed. We are calling for a legislative study committee, ideally this session, to examine the felony murder rule, its impacts on our community, and the decades worth of scholarly research that shows it does nothing to deter violent crime. In the meantime, we will continue to call for a repeal of the law. To make the case for our strong stance against the felony murder law, we are extremely proud and grateful to bring you 3 individuals who know firsthand the damage that this does to families in our community. Our first speaker is Tanisha Carter. Born in Tucson, Tanisha Carter is now living in Phoenix, where she manages properties and runs a fashion design company. In her free time, she enjoys music and reading. Tanisha is proud to be here today to speak for her brothers. Tanisha will read a short poem that she composed and then tell you her family. Go ahead, Tanisha.
Hi, how are you all? I want to thank you for bringing me here today and being able to speak, especially on behalf of my brothers. I would love to go ahead and speak and tell you about this poem that I wrote. Torn, it's called Torn. From the hip, we were locked. Where you were, I wasn't too far. When you laughed, I laughed times 2. When you got mad, I was mad too. When they took you, they took most of my heart. My dreams, my world was broken apart. When they told for a lifetime I would never see you, I was so broken. Worst part was, I knew you were broken times 2. To know I have been torn from you. This poem was written in honor of my brothers. My brother Jared just had a daughter and one on the way. Eric, he's tall, but a gentle giant. The sweetest, most 2 comedic guys you could ever meet. full of enthusiasm in life. They always acted as though they were older than me, trying to be protective, even though I was the oldest. Where would I actually be if they were not there? I really couldn't imagine a day without them. I remember it just like yesterday. It replays in my head. The last time that I saw them, their faces, their laughs, seeing their smiles. I never could have fathomed the last 12 years that have passed, convicted on felony murder charges for a life that they did not take. Here's the way that felony murder works in Arizona. The law lists 16 felonies that apply to the murder statute. If a person commits one of those felonies and someone else dies in the course of it, according to the law, they're liable for murder. My brothers were involved in a situation where marijuana was present. My brother Eric never left his house, but had 2 phone calls related to the situation. Jared was asked by a friend to accompany him, and he had went thinking it would take less than 10 minutes. He had no weapons, no intent to do anything else but stand by his friend. But when they got there, it appeared to be a setup. Someone tried to rob Jared and his friend fought back. Jared was able to pull his friend out of the situation, and they ran home. They were both scared, and they felt lucky that they were able to make it out alive. They didn't even know a person had been killed until the police had arrested them. Despite not killing anyone, both my brothers received life sentences in the Arizona Department of Corrections. It was only because they were peripherally involved in a felony murder involving marijuana, which is now legal. That they were charged with such a harsh crime. Neither of them were involved in the death, but prosecutors were able to unfairly leverage the law to put 2 innocent people, my brothers, away for life. Now, I do want to express my deepest condolences for the life loss. No one should have died. No one should have had to suffer any grief or life loss. But on here, I do need to advise that this law is not justice. Instead, the law has labeled 2 people as murderers who did not kill anyone. The law has caused my brothers to lose their lives. They are sentenced to death by incarceration because the mandatory minimum for felony murder is life in prison. 2 vibrant men, my brothers, Jared and Eric, have already lost 12 years of their life and will very likely never come home. Something does have to be done. The felony murder law needs to be demolished because it is harming innocent people. And I'm here to be a voice for my brothers because I can only pray for the ones in charge of making this law will repeal it in Arizona and give real justice that is needed. I do ask and plead to give their lives back and take the felony murder law away. Now, with both my brothers, losing them at the same time on the same day is something that I will never get over. Never. I haven't quite smiled the same since they've been gone. Holidays aren't the same. He has 2 daughters that he had just had, so they're actually growing up without a father. It feels as though my family and my heart has been torn apart. For this is the only lifetime that I have with them, and it has been taken away from them and us and all of us together. And I really hope that this does get repealed for them to be able to come back home as far as my family and for other families also. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tanisha, for that beautiful portrait of your brothers and for your courage. Next, We are very pleased to have with us two leaders who are heading up a felony murder campaign in the state of Minnesota. Linda Martison and Tony Carter are two personally impacted mothers who founded the Felony Murder Law Reform Organization, or FMLR, in 2019. FMLR was created to educate the public and lawmakers and to help change the felony murder doctrine in Minnesota and across the nation. Linda will speak first, followed immediately from Tony. Take it away, guys.
Well, thanks for inviting us to join you guys on this very important day in Arizona. This is Tony, I'm Linda, but more importantly, this is Brianna. Let's see if I can see it. And this is Megan, and this is their story. Our daughters were indicted on first-degree murder. The crazy thing is, they didn't commit a murder and they didn't intend to commit a murder. How then could they be charged with first-degree murder? It's called felony murder law. It's a law that exists in almost every state in this country. Bree and Megan's story begins with substance abuse. Both girls were masking deep trauma they experienced in high school. Both girls were victims of rape. They were self-medicating due to this trauma. Bree and Megan met and became fast friends and were spending a lot of time at a young couple's apartment who they considered friends and also were their drug dealer. One night, Brianna's prescription antidepressant medication went missing out of her purse after spending the evening with this young couple. And due to the high dose she was prescribed by her doctor, one of the side effects, if you stop taking it abruptly, could be seizures. So they were pretty concerned. So Bree made multiple calls and repeatedly texted the couple and asked if they could please return her medication. At some point, a picture was texted to Brianna of her prescription medication being sold on social media. This is when Bree and Megan decided to go back in and get it. During this time, Megan's friend reached out to her that he also had some items stolen from this young man, and he wanted to get his items back. So they decided all four of them would go ahead and get their items back from this man. One thing led to another, and one of the young men contacted an acquaintance who contacted his 33-year-old uncle to join them. The girls ended up meeting up in a parking lot with these young men. And one thing led to another, and the young men decided to stay in the car and send our girls in with the two men they weren't familiar with. They ended up in a stairwell, and the uncle told the girls to hold up. The girls turned around and saw the men put their hoods up, put some gloves on, and they pointed a gun at our girls and said, if you screw this up, we have no problem killing you both. At this point, both our girls would tell you now they were in way over their head. There was really no way out for them, and they were going to do what they were told. So the girls were instructed by this man to go in and get the items. So after knocking on the door, the girls did exactly this. The girls immediately found Brianna's prescription medication along with other drugs in the apartment. As the girls tried to head out the front door, the uncle stepped in front of them and told them they're not going anywhere yet, just to lay on the floor face down. With gun in hand, he instructed them and they complied. Megan and Brianna laid on the floor as the young man was beaten and shot. Later, the girls were able to flee for their lives from the apartment and were arrested the next day. When we found out what happened, we were in complete shock and were devastated. We never imagined either of our families would be in this situation, and we were completely devastated over the loss of life. But nothing could prepare us for what was about to happen. You see, we thought our girls would be charged for the crime they committed, maybe breaking and entering, burglary. Tony and I had no idea they could be charged for a murder that someone else committed. We just could not understand charged with first-degree murder, but that's exactly what is allowed under a felony murder law. In the end, the girls decided not to take their case to trial, even though they were forced at gunpoint, under duress. They were just too afraid of getting a life sentence, and so were we. And they were right. They very likely would have. Every year across the country, individuals go to trial believing in a system of justice that will understand and actually listen to the circumstances and not sentence someone to life in prison. But this law allows people to be sent to prison for life for a murder they didn't commit. So Brianna and Megan took a plea deal for unintentional second-degree murder. They each received 13.5-year sentences and have now been in prison for 4 years. Once Tony and I were strong enough, we decided it was time to educate ourselves on how this could happen and what we could do about it. And this is where Tony comes in to tell you what we did next.
So as you heard, we formed Felony Murder Law Reform in 2019. We created this because we saw an issue with the way the felony murder laws were being used against our daughters and so many others in prison. FMLR was started by our families because we could not let this continue in Minnesota or elsewhere. We spent the first 1.5 years researching and meeting with people to help us better understand the laws, what they were, and how they were being used. They helped us to understand the ripple effect this unjust set of laws has not only on the person, but also on our state, on our DOC, the taxpayer dollars, and on the families, something we were already knew too well. What we found in our meetings with law professors, public defenders, county attorneys, and lawmakers was there was one common denominator. We all agreed that people should be held accountable. But what we saw was that people were being held accountable for the actions of someone else. And is this justice? Is this what makes us safer? Every state leader we met with, no matter if they were a Democrat or a Republican, agreed that the felony murder law was not justice. FMLR Minnesota decided to go with a task force to bring together all stakeholders to one table at one time to look in depth at these laws. And in 2021, our lawmakers passed a legislative task force on aiding and abetting felony murder. I was appointed by Minnesota Governor Tim Walz to serve on this task force as an impacted family member. This task force focused on 3 primary areas: studying data, the laws and case laws in all 50 states, and outreach of both impacted persons and victims' rights support groups. At the end of our time together, we had a unanimous decision that these laws as written needed reformation and resentencing. We found in the data, like every other state, that these laws are disproportionately used against young men of color and women. Most were under the age of 24 when sentenced, and most had little to no prior criminal history score. There were also huge disparities in sentences, from probation to life sentences, depending on the charging county and the prosecutor. There was a lack of proportionality in response to their actions, lack of brain development, and complete disregard for mens rea. Our task force brought forth a 4-part recommendation that included reformation of the law to limit the charges to those who actually commit murder, those who aid and abet the murder, and those who act with reckless disregard for human life. We have also charged our lawmakers to offer a retroactivity to this to right the wrong that has been done to those impacted. We also said not to limit our reformations to an affirmative defense, and to expand our task force to go deeper into other statutes in which we did not spend time researching. We believe our report is expansive enough that Arizona and other states who are looking to reform their felony murder laws can use it as a basis for education. We believe that by reforming the Minnesota felony murder laws and making it retroactive, that we will make a more just justice system and actually increase public safety. This has been an arduous process that we are still fighting. We are encouraged by the process we have made and are so thankful to our bipartisan Senate and House champions, the Minnesota Second Chance Coalition, Professors Mark Osler and Perry Moriarty and Mary Liz Holberg, all who have stood with us and helped us over the last few years. We are working alongside of our daughters to make changes and cannot wait for the day that they come home to us. It is heartening to know that we are not alone in this fight. The people across this country are raising their voices against this unjust law and fighting to bring people home. People like Megan and Brianna, like Tanisha's brothers, Jarrett and Aerith. It's time to bring them home. We know this is an act of community and not a competition, and together we can make change happen. Thank you.
Many thanks to you both for sharing your stories and for your courageous action to right this wrong. You are truly an example we hope to follow. Finally, I would like to introduce you to my colleague, Rebecca Felk, who is the Director of Policy and Research at Just Communities, Arizona. Rebecca will speak briefly about a disturbing piece of legislation that has been introduced now for the third year, which would actually expand the harmful felony murder statute to apply to people who played any part in an accidental overdose death. Becca?
Thank you, everybody, for being here today. As we listen to Tanisha's beautiful poem and her speech on the experience of her brothers, Jarrett and Aerith, and as we try to understand the years of work Linda and Tony have been doing for their daughters, Megan and Brianna, we must not only work to remove the existing felony murder law, but also fight against the addition of new laws that, if passed, will cause the same kind of unjust sentencing. Moving through the Arizona legislature is a concerning bill that is felony murder by another name. HB 2021 is a bill that would make drug trafficking homicide a new crime. HB 2021 passed unanimously out of the House Judiciary Committee on February 9th. The bill is currently stalled, but could go to the House floor for a vote at any time. We are told the intention of this bill is to stop overdose deaths by deterring people from selling drugs. But the reality is, HB 2021 will cause more people to die. When there is threat of prison, it means that people may not call 911 when someone is suffering an overdose. Each minute when an overdose is happening is vital, and we need people to call for help right away without hesitation. HB 2021 does not target large-level illegal drug traffickers. While prosecutors have claimed this bill will address producers or traffickers of fentanyl, as of 2017, the DEA had never found a fentanyl lab operating in the United States. The truth is, the bill's language is so broad that it allows people who sell to support a substance abuse disorder or simply share narcotics to be charged with homicide if a person tragically overdoses. There is no requirement to prove intent to harm or even that the drug directly resulted in the death of a person. HB 2021 will cause more people to go to prison. The mandatory minimum sentence proposed in this legislation is 10 years, with the threat of as much as 29 years in prison. Specifically, it will send friends or family of the person who passes to prison. Studies in New Jersey and Wisconsin, states where this law exists, found that 80 to 89% of defendants charged with this ill-conceived law were a loved one of the person who passed away. Instead of healing and preventing harm, HB 2021 will cause more families and communities to be traumatized by a system that is not addressing the problem. It is important to note, HB 2021 is a revision of 3 previous mandatory sentencing and extreme punishment bills that failed in 2018, 2020, and 2021. These previous versions failed because advocates from throughout Arizona and across the country, people who brought their stories of direct experience, practitioners who explained the long-term consequences, and former law enforcement who saw that these laws do not fix the problem, stood together and said no. No to more punishment. No to the criminalization of substance use disorder. No to the false narrative that a system of harsh punishment for deterrence will save lives, when in reality, all it does is take more. We want dangerous drugs like fentanyl out of our communities. We want people to get help if they're suffering with substance use disorder. We want to stop losing our loved ones to a preventable death. But HB 2021 does not accomplish any of this. Thankfully, we know what does accomplish it. What reduces overdoses and keeps people alive is harm reduction practices. This is especially true for the use of fentanyl testing strips. Just 1 year ago, fentanyl testing strips were illegal here in Arizona, a Class 6 felony with the punishment of up to 2 years in prison. But last year, Senator Marsh passed 1486, a bill that defelonized fentanyl testing strips so people can ensure the drugs they use will not kill them. We need investment in the distribution and education of these fentanyl testing strips, not the ineffective and punitive HB 2021. That is what will save lives in Arizona. That is the solution, not felony murder by another name. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Becca. We hope by now that you are in agreement with us and so many others across the US that felony murder is an unfair and disproportionate sentence that offers no chance for rehabilitation and does nothing to prevent crime. We've chosen to focus on this issue not only because the law is so extreme and unduly harsh, but because we feel it is an important illustration of the myriad ways in which harsh punishment is sold to the public under false pretenses. Here we have people sentenced for murder who have not committed murder. It really is that simple. And yet, the name of the law itself would give one the impression that this is a just punishment for a heinous violent act. While this is an extreme example, it is by no means unique. Our statutes are written so broadly and mandatory sentencing is so prevalent that we see people throughout the system serving time under categories and labels that are completely divorced from whatever it was that they may or may not have done. Another example is drug sales or drug trafficking. We assume from this title, it would apply to a person who is moving a large amount of drugs to many people, the media stereotype of a drug dealer. But in Arizona, addicts who are selling small amounts to support their own habits are sentenced as though they run cartels. Sales of any amount of meth or narcotics in Arizona is an automatic Class 2 felony, the same as manslaughter. There are many such examples of sentencing laws that are deliberately misleading, creating new categories for things that are already illegal and already result in stiff penalties. There are also classes of offenses that cast a net so wide that they ensnare high numbers of people for no legitimate criminological or penological purpose whatsoever. This false advertising may benefit the political careers of some elected officials, but it does nothing to make our communities any safer. We're being sold a bill of goods, and the price tag is astronomically high. As you may have heard, the proposed corrections budget this year is $1.5 billion. Yet we know that these facilities are chronically understaffed, and there's virtually no rehabilitative programming offered to the majority of incarcerated people. It is warehousing, and it comes at the expense of other state budget items like education, mental health care, and substance abuse treatment. We at JCA are committed to telling the truth and ensuring that our leaders and lawmakers have the best information and resources possible to make good policy decisions. To reiterate, our call to action today is for the creation of a study committee to examine the felony murder law in Arizona with the ultimate goal of a full repeal. We encourage you to go to our website, justcommunitiesarizona.org, to learn more and to hear stories like those shared today by our amazing panelists. And we're inviting the community to lend their voices as well. Anyone in Arizona who has been personally impacted by this law is invited to share their story with us, either in writing or a short video. There's a form on our website for people to send in their contributions, and we'll post that in the chat. We'll be updating the site as we receive them, and we'll be letting folks know via social media when we have new stories added, so please be sure to check back regularly. So now we'd like to open it up for your questions. You can submit a question via the Ask a Question button at the bottom of your screen or in the chat. I will read the questions and hand them off to different panelists to respond. And we ask that you focus on the impacts of the law and the proposed reforms rather than interrogating the panelists for specifics related to criminal cases of their loved ones. We're also happy to set up a time for you to do a more in-depth interview or have a meeting with any of our panelists at another time. So please feel free to reach out to me or Becca, and we'll post our contact information in the chat. So with that, let us know your questions. So here's a question for Tanisha. Did you tell your brothers about your participation in this project? And if so, how do they feel about it?
Yes, I did let one of my brothers know. I haven't spoken to my other brother since he had gotten arrested in 2010. I haven't seen them. It's been years, but I did let him know during message that I was going to speak on their behalf and assist with reforming the felony murder law because I feel it needs to be done. And especially anything that I can do as their sister to be able to help them in this unfortunate situation that has occurred and that they're in.
Thanks, Tanisha. And I see Ben asked, what are the bill numbers for the bill this year that would repeal felony murder? That would be HB 2655. And as I mentioned, unfortunately, it did not receive a hearing. Here's a question for Linda and Tony. What has been the most successful approach for you in Minnesota for getting legislators to listen? How did you convince them to organize this task force?
Yeah, thanks for the question. We've been told from the very beginning that the most powerful tool we had were the stories of Megan and Brianna, their faces and their story, right? Because data is data, but hearing a personally impacted story. And so that's where we started. We went to a lot of criminal justice reform events at colleges where legislators and senators were going, and we would corner them and ask for a meeting. And once pre-COVID, right, we were able to get face-to-face meetings, and we went from office to office and told our story. And again, there wasn't anyone that heard our story that didn't think it was wrong. And then once our girls were in prison, they made connections with other women who were serving under these same sentences. And so we started gathering more and more stories. Then we started reaching out to men. We were made aware of gathering their stories. And so that's what's been most effective, is telling them a story, because people who didn't go to law school do not know about the felony murder laws. And even if you did go to law school, you likely learned it in first year crim law class, and then you never hear about it again until, if you're a criminal defense attorney or a prosecutor, until a case comes before you. So it has been an educational process, and once they heard the stories, they supported us.
Yeah, and we met lots of women through our daughters, but one woman stands out. She's Mo, and she's doing a life sentence, and she's on our website if you want to read more about her story. But in her situation, after getting to know her a little better, she had me talk to her lawyer, and in her case, she got a life sentence while the person who committed the murder will be out in 20 years. So we started to see these stories where our felony murder ladies and men were getting longer sentences than the person who actually committed, the murder. So those were powerful to share with the legislators too, because they're like, what? How can that be? I'm like, felony murder law, that's how. So, yeah.
I think that's such an interesting point to bring home, because one of the arguments that's made in favor of these kinds of laws is that there'll be some kind of deterrent, right? Like people will stop and think, oh, gee, if I commit this crime, I could get this long sentence. And of course, that's ludicrous, right? Even as you mentioned, attorneys don't know what felony murder is sometimes until they're up against it. And so but that's such a prevalent narrative, I think, and still being used to promote harsh legislation like 2021 that Becca just talked about. Becca, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what we know about felony murder in Arizona. This is often a question that we get from reporters, like, do we know how many people in our state have been convicted of felony murder?
Yes, thank you. So unfortunately, we don't have the data that Tony and Linda were able to share from their report, because a full study on this has not been done. And this is just, I want to reemphasize, this is our ask today, is we want a study on this done to understand it more. What we do know is in 2018, there was a study done by AFSC-AZ, the Arizona Criminal Justice Commission, that looked at what laws had been charged on people in the last 15 years. And this, from 2018 data, we know that over 700 people were charged with felony murder here in Arizona. We know from talking to people, from talking to those who are directly impacted, from talking to defense attorneys who work on these cases, there are many people who are often charged with this, and then, similar to Brianna and Megan, take a plea down. So it's important to recognize that felony murder is not just a conviction, it is a coercive tool to push people into plea agreements who have not committed the harm that they're being labeled as of doing. We often see this happen with people who maybe are with their loved ones, with a partner when this happened, and are told by prosecutors, we'll drop this charge if you plea against your loved one. And that is an unfair, cruel situation to put people in. And that is how this is used. By estimating, from what we know from the AFSC-AZ report and looking at the numbers in the Department of Corrections, we estimate that there are about 1/3 of people who are in our state prisons right now under the title of murder are in for felony murder. But we won't know that exact number unless we have a study committee, unless the courts, the Department of Corrections, and prosecutors work with us to get us that data and know what is truly happening. But we do know, again, from direct experience, that this often impacts people of color more, this impacts women more, and this impacts young people more. I highly recommend just Googling felony murder Arizona, and you will see some extremely heartbreaking reports on how this bill is being used. And that is what we hope to continue to show in our stories as we collect them over the next few months.
Thank you, Becca. Thank you, Becca. Any other questions from folks? I'm looking in the chat. I'm not seeing any hands raised. I did want to at least give our panelists a chance to add anything else that you might want folks to know, anything that's kind of come up for you during our talk today.
We just want to thank you for the opportunity from Minnesota to be joining you guys. And we fully support this task force or study group, however you frame it in Arizona. The reality is this will just bring forth the information that the lawmakers need to make a decision around this. Without that data, right? No harm done in a task force. And I believe that if you are able to pass that and do the study, Arizona, like Minnesota, like so many other states doing this work, will discover the unjust nature of these laws and the ability to still hold people accountable for crimes they commit, just not the crime of somebody else. So thank you, and we wish you the very best of luck.
Good luck.
Thank you both so much. Any other last words? Well, we know it's a busy Monday and we don't want to keep people past our time. We are so very grateful to all of our panelists for joining us today, and for everyone listening in out there on Facebook and here in the Zoom. We're so thrilled to be able to bring you this expertise and help raise these issues that are so invisible in our community. Again, we very much hope that you will go to our website, Just Communities.
I think, sorry, Caroline has an issue. So I can see we are dropping it in the chat. Please check out the websites of the work that is happening. You can go to our website at justcommunities.org. Check out campaigns to find our stories on felony murder. Please go to FLMLR.org to learn about the work that Tony and Linda are doing. And again, if you go see our stories, you'll be able to see Tanisha's beautiful poem and the story she worked on with her brothers and about the unjust sentencing that they had. We appreciate you all so much for taking the time today. Again, if you have further questions or would like to do any sort of one-on-one interview discussion, you can email us at hello@justcomaz.org. You can also reach out to Caroline or I at our email addresses. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a wonderful day.